Black Lives Matter. It's a movement that's swept the United States, confronting racism, police brutality, deaths, of course, in police custody. But now it's coming here to Britain, and it's planning protests all over the country and actions in the coming weeks and the coming months. So I'm going to speak to two of the key activists behind this movement here in Britain. One, Marcia Rigg, who lost her own brother in police custody here in Brixton, not far from where I'm standing right now, and Wail Qasim. And I'm going to talk to them about why now? What is Black Lives Matter seeking to achieve? What is racism in modern Britain? What does it mean? And can we ever get rid of it? So Black Lives Matter is now being founded here in Britain. The instant response, which, you know, I've been trolled about myself, as I'm sure you all have, about Black Lives Matter. Why do we need it in Britain? This is an American problem.
In the UK, a person dies in police custody every 6 days. Since 1990 at least, we've had 0 convictions of police officers. There's this big movement in the United States, but they have seen police officers being prosecuted, whereas our justice system seems adamant not to kind of give people like Marcia and other families a sense of justice when police officers are caught up in having been involved in killing someone.
Do you have to think of examples of people who've been killed here?
There's the death of Joy Gardner, the death of Christopher Alder, the death of Roger Sylvester and Cynthia Jarrett, Cherry Gross, Colin Roach. The list is endless. These were deaths that happened in the 90s and in the 80s. And the deaths are still current. We had the death of Sarah Reid in the mental health system. We had the death of Jermaine Baker, who was shot by the police in December. And recently we had the death of MZ Mohammed. These are just in the last 8 months. There's been systematic failures. Black Lives Matter is a platform to raise the issue of the controversial deaths in custody, not just in police, but in prisons, mental health institutions, and immigration units.
Your own brother died in police custody, not far from here. Do you want to explain briefly what happened to your brother?
This month will mark the 8th year memorial of the death of my brother, Sean Rigg. The case is currently a criminal case. The Crown Prosecution Service is looking at the file, and I'm hoping that there will be criminal charges imminently. Sean suffered with mental health issues, and he was extremely psychotic on the day that he died. Over half the deaths in police custody are young men with mental health issues, particularly black men. And so there is concerns within the mental health system itself. But there's also the issue of restraint-related deaths. There's a lot of controversy about this because prone position can cause death, and that's what happened to Sean. Even though he was already under control, he was handcuffed, he was not resisting or struggling, and yet the jury found that he was restrained face down for a period of 8 minutes. And that goes beyond police training. I campaign that prone restraint should be eradicated because it can cause deaths, particularly with young men with mental health issues. But there have been so many other black deaths that have not reached the stage of prosecution, let alone a conviction.
There's an independent police complaints commission, but your own case underscored just how ineffective, to say the least, the IPCC is when it comes to investigating deaths like that of your brother. What is wrong with the IPCC? Why is it not working?
They are called independent police complaints commission, but there are police officers, ex-police officers, who are fronting the front of the investigation, and they are there initially, immediately after the death, where the Department of Professional Standards is called in, and they have goal meetings with the IPCC. The officers are allowed to collude by given the opportunity to sit in a room, or they're not interviewed immediately after the death when it's fresh in their mind. And this is what happened in Sean's case. Dame Anne Owers, the chair of the IPCC, commissioned an independent review into the way that they investigate deaths in custody. And the Silva Castaglia report is highly critical of the way that those investigations are currently done. The families were not able to depend on the IPCC in the past. There's the issue of legal aid, where families are not afforded an equal battlefield to be given automatic funding, yet the police and the other institutions are automatically funded. So from the very beginning, the families are obstructed from getting to the truth of what actually happened to their loved one. And the IPCC appear to be, in my opinion, certainly initially in the beginning of Sean's investigation, that they were in cahoots with the police.
When I tweet about this, I guarantee you, the first few tweets, they will say, all lives matter. That will be the response. What's the response to those people?
All lives do matter, but we wouldn't have to have a campaign to say that Black Lives Matter if that was the material fact. 1,563 people have died in police custody since 1990. A huge proportion of those are black deaths in custody and black and minority ethnic deaths in custody. You're twice overrepresented within the figures if you are a non-white person. All lives should matter, but in order to get to a position where all lives matter, we have to make sure that Black lives matter too.
This is a very kind of simple, naive question, but I think it's an important question. A lot of people watching this will think to themselves they know what racism is. If asked, they will come up with their own definition. But how would you define racism?
It's something that's been made up. We were not born racist. People are discriminated against because of the colour of their skin. That's what racism is, and where black people are being stopped and searched disproportionately from their white counterparts in education, in employment, in housing. We are discriminated against, and it's been happening for decades, and it's the story of our life, in fact. And that's why we say Black Lives Matter.
Racism isn't only a prejudice that people kind of have in their minds, it's also kind of a history and a structure that mean that we see these inequalities. It's a history that's borne out in this country through our involvement in the Atlantic slave trade and colonialism across much of the globe. That's the kind of place where racism is born. We see its legacy kind of taking root in our society today. I think one of the things that people don't perhaps often get about racism, you can have a statistic which is absolutely true, that you're 7 times more likely to be stopped and searched if you're a black person in this country. We also have to appreciate the fact that white people often can go through the world without even thinking that they would be stopped and searched. It might not figure in your life, and I mean, of course, white people are stopped and searched as well, but it's entirely possible that it won't figure in your life, whereas that's just simply not true if you're a black person, especially a young black man, when it comes to something like stop and search. Someone like you, Owen, obviously can go through life without necessarily being stopped and searched. I don't know whether you have, but someone like myself has been stopped and searched nearing 30 times over my very short lifetime. And of course that's kind of wrapped up with class and where you're born as well, but that's what race is too. It's a classed thing. You're much more likely to be in communities that are heavily policed and heavily subject to things like stop and search if you're black.
Young school children, like at the age of 7 or 8, which I've met, are scared and concerned because they are black, and I've been told personally by a young black child of 7 or 8 years old that they're scared of the police because they're scared that as a young black man, when they grow up, become a teacher, that they could actually be killed by the police. And so it's ingrained in them. They've seen their brothers, they've seen their uncles, they've seen their fathers being disproportionately stopped. Mm-hmm. There's an ongoing relationship between the police and the black community, which is far from healthy.
The war on drugs collides very much with racism, doesn't it? So it's not just that black people are far more likely to be stopped and searched, even though government statistics show they're significantly less likely to take drugs themselves, but also, if found with possession of drugs, far more likely to be charged. Mm-hmm. And also incarceration, for example.
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things that, if we compare with the United States, we actually find that in terms of our population size, we incarcerate far more black men in our prisons than the United States, and we think of the United States as this racist prison industrial complex, which is absolutely true, but we're facing the same problems with our criminal justice system here, wherein you're much more likely to be stopped, you're much more likely to be arrested and then charged, and then once you get in front of the courts, you're much more likely to be convicted and given a harsher sentence, meaning that our prisons are full of especially black and Asian men and women.
So Black Lives Matter here in Britain, what are its aims in the coming weeks, months? What's it seeking to achieve?
After Trayvon Martin died and the hashtag Black Lives Matter came about, I quickly realised that not much people were aware of the deaths that were happening here. We went to the United States last year to meet the Black Lives Matter co-founders and to meet other families that have suffered the same events like myself and other families. And what we found was that the deaths were almost identical. The only difference was that obviously there's more deaths happening in America than there are in Britain. But in essence, the issue of disproportionality, the issue of accountability, the issue of conspiracy, the issue of young black men with mental health was identical to what was happening here. And so therefore that cannot be a coincidence. The issue is racism. The movement has become worldwide, and so there's no reason why Britain should not be a part of it.
We want people to go away and organise in their local areas. We face racism every single day on the streets of Britain, whether that's street racism or state racism. We want people to go away and address the inequalities, the stop and search, the housing, all of these things that's happening in their communities that absolutely leads up to the problem of black people being killed in state custody. These things are in an entire continuum with one another, so we need to be dealing with black deaths, but also looking at black life and making black life better in the United Kingdom.
Theresa May is now investigating racism within our judicial system. So isn't that a welcome thing? Is that a positive thing? Are you optimistic? Are you hopeful?
I absolutely welcome it, and that she's looking at these issues. But I have to look at it with caution. My family and the family of Shani Lewis, alongside the charity inquest and our legal team, met with Theresa May last year to talk about the issues of deaths in police custody. But it's the way that the families are treated. We're left as victims indefinitely, where we're not on equal footing when there's a death, not just black people, but white people also, in terms of working with the IPCC and the long drawn-out investigations, in the difficulty in obtaining the disclosure of the evidence and the issue of legal aid. And she did listen to us, and she sent her officials into the IPCC's offices to look at the way that they investigate such deaths. And so now that Theresa May is the Prime Minister, it will be interesting to see what her response will be, and also that the report, which is imminent, is transparent, which I believe it will be, and whatever recommendations are made in it should be acted upon. The problem here is that there have been recommendations made voluminously, collecting dust, and lessons have not been learned. And so what is important is that the government needs to have a political will to effect real change so that public confidence is restored.
Do you think one day we will build a society where racism has been driven completely away?
I'm not sure if racism will ever be eradicated by the powers that be, but I hope I can see it in my lifetime. I don't know if I'm going to ever see that.
Almost certainly won't come from the powers that be, and it can't be a top-down operation, but racism had a beginning. It had a beginning in Western Enlightenment thought, philosophers like Immanuel Kant kind of producing these great taxonomies of races across the world and embedding this within how we think. So there's a huge process of having to undo all of that. So we need great philosophers, great cultural leaders, great political leaders to begin to undo how racism is embedded in our society. But I think if it's got a beginning, it definitely can have an end. That's what Black Lives Matter is working towards. I think a big part of Black Lives Matter is thinking about black futures. Racism can have an end. We've got to make that end a reality.
The chains will be broken one day.
Some of you are probably thinking, Black Lives Matter, it's an American thing. We don't need it here in Britain, it's a totally different context. Well, I hope by listening to them, I hope at least we can all understand that racism is very much a problem, a scourge here in British society. And injustice is never overcome by just sitting around and being polite. People need to take action against it. So I hope in the coming weeks, the coming months, many of you will be supportive of what Black Lives Matter is trying to do, and we can unite all of us to overcome racism. And I want to hear your thoughts though. Please do leave your comments about what you've seen in terms of how we're going to take on racism, how we're going to overcome it, maybe your own experiences of racism. As ever, subscribe. I'll see you next time.